Right, let's make a start, everybody. So welcome everybody to the Merton Clinical Commissioning Group Governing Body meeting in public. We have apologies from Sam Page and Ben Luscombe. We've got no further apologies. I think we're still expecting Mike to join us, and we are quorate. We're not expecting an alarm test today, so if the alarm sounds, we'll need to leave the building via the emergency doors. There's a fire exit there. And we've got a part 2 meeting following this, in which we'll be moving to meeting room C. We have to be out of the Chaucer Centre by 5:30, so I'm going to make sure we absolutely stick to time, if possible, get ahead of time, because we don't have any scope to continue the discussion beyond that point. So let's go straight on to the declaration of interest. Is the current register that we have accurate, full and current for everybody? And are there any particular items people need to declare in relation to anything on the agenda today? No, I'm taking it that we're happy it's all accurate. Good. We've got the minutes of the Part 1 governing body meeting that was held on 3rd of July to approve. So can we go through those? I'll whiz through page by page. So if we start with page 1 of those minutes, and then page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, 7, page 8, 9, 10.
Page 9, Andrew, is just one point of clarification. Under 6.2, the third paragraph, the point of the data reporting error was that patients had entered being treated and discharged from the service in the month. That was the 35 that was reported in error. I can send Yvonne just that change of words, but okay. The point was it was those people who were treated and exited in that month.
Okay, thank you. Page 10 and page 11. So are we happy that's an accurate record of the meeting? Yep, so I will approve those. Are there any matters arising from that discussion that we've not picked up on the agenda that people need to flag up? No? Okay, so let's go straight into section 3 of the agenda, which is an update. These are all verbal updates, so you've got one from me and one from James as Managing Director. The real update that I wanted to give was just because not all of you perhaps have, well, we certainly haven't had a governing body meeting in public since we had the Children and Young People as Trailblazer announcement. So the fact that in South West London we've been successful in the next wave of Children and Young People's Mental Health Trailblazer funding bids, we've been successful in getting 7 new Trailblazer clusters for South West London, which is really quite remarkable. 2 of those impact on Merton, so there is a pan-South West London bid focused on further education, which will cover South Thames College in Merton, and then there is a bid focused on special educational needs that crosses Sutton and Merton, which again will benefit children in Merton. So it's very exciting. What it means when you add in the other investments we've made is that 50% of pupils across South West London will be covered by one of the new mental health support teams, which is really remarkable. So just really huge congratulations to the team who've been working on that. And I think it's a really good example of something we've done well at scale across South West London. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. James, over to you for the Managing Director of it.
Nothing to report, everything's on the agenda.
Okay. And same from you, Sarah. Okay. Great, thank you. So should we go straight into the first main section, which is strategy and planning? And James, you're going to talk through 4.1.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to take the paper as read and just perhaps highlight a few key points on where we are in the process. This is principally to cite the governing body ahead of drafts of the document that's talked about coming back later in the autumn. So earlier in the year, the NHS published its 5-year long-term plan for the development of the service, and this reflects recent funding commitments, long-term funding commitments that have been made in relation to the NHS. It sets out the priorities for the NHS, and it sets out how the system is expected to evolve. Now, as we have anticipated for some time in South West London. The national system, has asked each area of the country to respond to the long-term plan by setting it out its own 5-year strategy to deliver the NHS long-term plan in its local context. We have for some time in South West London operated a mechanism whereby instead of planning on a South West London level and as a group of CCGs, actually our transformation plans primarily rest at borough level. So we have a local health and care plan for Merton, and that is not a CCG plan, it is a cross-system health and care plan. So it's something that's been extensively through local partners, through our Merton Health and Care Together programme, which has taken leadership of its development, and it has also been through the Health and Wellbeing Board in a number of draft forms. So the way we are responding to the long-term plan, the way we are putting together our 5-year strategy for South West London is by bringing together all of these borough-level local health and care plans, and they are the building block of our South West London 5-year strategy. There are then a number of areas that we're approaching at a South West London basis. These have been developed through extensive clinical engagement. So we had a clinically led conference earlier in the year attended by about 250 clinicians from across South West London to identify and work through what areas of service transformation would benefit from a more cross South West London approach, working with local strategies. So a really good example is around, say, cardiovascular disease, really close links into local strategies around diabetes, but actually there are a number of pieces of work that we need to do on a South West London basis. There are also a number of enabler areas that we take forward on a South West London basis, and workforce is a really good example of those where we need to work with partners across South West London to develop the workforce to deliver the plan. So that's broadly how the plan is coming together. It will be the Merton Local Health and Care Plan, the local health and care plans from the other 5 boroughs, with a number of cross-cutting and enabling strategies. We need to make a submission to the regulators of an initial draft plan on the 27th of September, and we've been working on this for some time before we knew these timescales, because we knew roughly what they would be, and that is something that we will bring back to the governing body in seminar in October, and then the final submission is on the 15th of November. So we anticipate that at the November governing bodies we will be looking at a near final version of the plan. But it's worth emphasising this is something that isn't just in CCGs, this is really a whole cross-system plan, but built bottom up from a borough level. I am aware that there are many authors in parts of this process, so I was going to invite Josh to say something about our Merton Local Health and Care Plan, where we are with implementation, and then Sarah for any further thoughts on the South West London respect.
So Merton Health and Care Plan has been developed over the last number of months. It's been approved. We had a really useful development session yesterday with all partners to discuss how we move from developing that plan to delivering it, and how we use the wider team over and above the Merton Health and Care Together board to make sure those improvements get made. That was very, very positive. We talked about additional support we'd need to give to staff to start adopting those collaborative behaviours to make some of those plans a reality, but also reflected there's a lot of really good work that's already been delivered in areas around diabetes, for example, support for people in care homes and so on and so forth. The other thing that we've been doing recently is discussing with colleagues across all of our providers in Merton to understand how the ways of working expressed in the Merton Health and Care Plan look in this planning round we're entering into now, which is essentially year 1 of the 5-year plan. That's also been really positive. It's opened up discussions we've not had previously, so how do we align the transformation initiatives that we've been developing together with more internal focused transformation within providers, how those can complement each other and add to one another. So it's early days. We had the first session last week, but we've committed to starting to bring together some of our more technical groups that act under our formal governance to include providers and commissioners to have further conversations.
So, and just finally, what I would say is that we are submitting this draft, as James said, at the end of September, but we will be talking to all the partners through October and November to get their feedback into the final published document on the 15th of November. It's in two parts, the plan. The first part is the narrative, which you will, I'm sure, all recognise, which is as described by Josh and James, and then the second part of it is actually quite a significant set of spreadsheets that James Murray and others are working on that actually look at our activity and finances for the next 5 years. There's a number of assumptions that we'll have to make within that, and actually to thank everyone that's been involved, because it's quite a lot to bring together. So even though we've been working on the narrative for quite some time, we still haven't even got the finalised spreadsheets that we need in order to submit at the end of September for some parts of it. So we're, the people are working very hard at the last minute on some of this stuff. What it will look like, the narrative will look like an infographic type document. So we're hoping it'll be easy to read for people, and that they will recognise all of the work that you're doing locally, plus all the work that's been going on across South West London. And we are reasonably prepared for this, I would say, and it's the next stage on from the STP plan. And we'll be going through the programme board as well as through the statutory organisations in South West London.
Thank you very much. So this item is really for information, to update us on where things are at, but I'll open it up to questions, comments from the board. Any thoughts you've got about what we might be overlooking as part of this? David?
James, just in terms of, because obviously we're responding to the NHS plan that's been published, but when we eventually see what's going to be submitted, what level, can you just get a sense of how much detail we're going to go into? So are we going to, is this going to look like a sort of a series of detailed implementation plans with activities, dates, and what's going to happen by when? Or is it a sort of much more, as I described, much more strategic than that?
So it's much more strategic, and it will be we hope a reasonably short document, which will be infographic based. So you'll have a bit like your plan on the page, and the plans that you've done locally, sort of saying this is the needs of the local population in Merton, this is the areas that we're focusing on, and this is how we intend to do it. So the actual narrative document, I'm hoping, will only be about 25 pages long for the whole of South West London. The background papers, which will be all the appendices, which we'll put out in public, but won't be really detailed. People can look at it, but will just be the assumptions that we've put in around activity, the financial assumptions over the next 5 years, and all of those kind of things. So you'll have that level of detail, but it won't have the bit in between. You'll be able to see the narrative leading from one to the other, but there won't be a whole load of plans attached to those. There will be plans going forwards, and those will be the delivery of your local health and care plans. So it'll be a much more strategic document.
I think it's worth saying that a lot of the work of the MHCT programme now is actually about bottoming out that detail. So we've gone quite a long way in terms of implementation planning for all the commitments made as part of the Merton Local Health and Care Plan. And the work that we're keen to do with James and his colleagues is to make sure that because there's supporting finance submissions to the 5-year strategy, that actually we have a consistent way of articulating the expected impact of our transformation within the sort of numbers that sit behind the plan.
Anything else? No? Thank you for that. It's helpful to be kept abreast of where things are at and see something more concrete coming back in due course. Good, so let's go on to 4.2. Sarah, you're going to talk about the CCG merger process.
So we are going to have more time to discuss this later, but the question today is getting the agreement from the governing body to set up a committee in common across South West London to agree the process to actually submit the application for merger. So that's where we're trying to go to. And just a bit of background to that is that we did all agree in April that we supported the merger, but actually the decision is for the membership. So this is one of the decisions that isn't to the governing body, is actually for the membership. So there is a process going on currently to develop all of the documentation, both for the governance documents that will support the decision of the members, as well as the application document, which is slightly different, which has a lot more detail around strategies for the future and how we'll actually function. So both of those pieces of work are going on. The intent is that when we bring the CIC together, we will have all of the documentation for the application available for governing body or for the CIC members to see, and the CIC members will be confirming that we should submit that. It will be submitted pending a vote by the members. So the idea is we will submit the application by the end of September, and the votes by the members will happen in October, prior to a national panel. I think it's at the end, sometime at the end of October, but we're going to get all of our application in and votes done by the 20th of October. So the question today for the part one is, are we happy to set up that committee in common? Because that's our process, we have to agree to set the committee in common up. And the second question is, who's going to be our members on that committee in common? So that's the kind of question for the part one.
And it says in the paper 19th of September, but
Yeah.
it's now going to be the 26th, is that right?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've actually changed the date to the 26th of September. Then you can see nearly finalised documentation, that's the one thing. But also there is another meeting that's a London-wide meeting that many of the members of the CIC would have to go to on the 19th. However, we're going to hold the 19th as a seminar date for any governing body members that would like to come along and see some of the documentation and have a discussion. So the executive will make themselves available on the 19th for discussion across South West London in seminar form with any members that would like to come to that. But the actual formal committee in common will now be on the 26th, and it will be between 4:30 and 6:30. And just to go back, the three members are the GP chair, one of the executive, and a lay member for the or if it's not GP chair, it'll be one of the other clinical members.
Thank you, Sarah. So the first thing we're going to be asked to do is approve holding a committee in common. So we'll need to do that before we agree the representation. Before I ask people to do that, are there questions or comments that people have got about us doing this? Holding the committee in common? No? So are we going to be happy to approve that? That's a yes, okay. And then in terms of who's going to be on it, I can attend on the 26th, and then we need a lay member, and I think, Claire, that might be you, because David, you're on leave as well, aren't you? So it's going to be myself and Claire, and then one of the exec, which we can determine nearer the time so that we've got the right balance across the 6 CCGs. Are people happy with that? Yes, any questions? No? Okay, so we're going to approve those two things then, that we'll hold the committee in common, and those will be our representatives. Okay, let's go on then to section 5. We've got the finance report. Neil.
Okay, thanks Andrew. So just to note, this is the month 4 report. You'll note it's in a more concise format, although I think the risk and mitigation table that everybody finds helpful is not included in this. I'll make sure it's included in the next report. So really just to say, it's still obviously early on in the year, but we're still reporting on plan, but there are some significant risks sat within that. However, I don't think any new risks have actually emerged this year from this month compared to previous months, but they haven't reduced either. So we do have a number of mitigations though in place at the moment to cover those risks. And just to be clear what the risks actually are, that would be around out-of-sector acute contracts that remain on a payment by results basis. We've got some RCT activity around St George's in particular. At the moment it's unsure as to when that's likely to tail off. We've got issues around continuing healthcare, and we think we've now got to the bottom of some of the legacy issues, so we think we can probably firm that forecast up as we move forward now. And then we've got some issues around mental health placement in addition. So in terms of the mitigations we've got in place, we've released the whole of the 0.5% contingency that we had. We're asking budget holders to hold any underspends that they may have at the moment, and any of the small reserves that we did have available, they've now been released. So the QIP is actually on plan. So at the moment, given that most of the acute QIP is pretty much baked into the acute position, everything else is pretty much on plan there. So I've not really got anything more to say. I think, obviously, or hopefully most of it is within the report anyway. But I'd just like the governing body to know the, obviously, early time of the year, but that we're still on plan at this stage, noting the risks that are outlined in the report. And obviously the Finance Committee will be keeping abreast of all the sort of risk and mitigations as going forward. But I'm happy to pick up any questions.
And Neil, we've got finance on the part 2 agenda as well, so we'll be able to spend some time looking at mitigations, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Look into a bit more detail of the mitigations that we've got.
David, do you want to say something?
I guess just to add to what Neil has said, so I think the overview on page 3 is really quite helpful in terms of reminding ourselves on where the risks are, and I think particularly the 3rd bullet point. So unlike in previous years, we've got less risk on acute because of the way the contracts have been set with the major providers. So I think that is really positive, given that what we saw last year, a lot of risk on the local providers. But what is noted there are some issues of, as we're saying, around acute out of the local system, and the ones that Neil has mentioned about continuing care and mental health. So the Finance Committee has already been through the numbers as stated here, and we'll continue to have that level of scrutiny on the financial position as we go forward.
So, have we got more questions or comments at this point? This is for information. I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. I know we'll have a slightly longer discussion later as well. Okay, so we'll take that as noted. Thank you, Neil. Let's go on to the performance report. John.
Thanks, Andrew. A few areas I want to call out from the report, then happy to take questions on any part of the report. First of all, I wanted to update the governing body on the A&E deep dive assessment that's beginning next week at St George's. The NHS Intensive Support Team are doing a piece of work with the CCG and the Trust to further review the issues and the drivers that have caused performance to be quite variable over the last few months, and also below the target that's been set and below the 95% national standard. We know there's a whole host of issues that affect the performance of a A&E department, and at the moment there is no compelling narrative to tell us which of those are the most important in terms of driving those variations in performance. So there are days where St George's has relatively low numbers of attendances and admissions, and also performance is very poor on those days. There's days where those numbers are very high and performance likewise is very good. And there's days where staffing or delayed transfers could be a factor, and the review is going to set out to assess each of those drivers of variability and provide a report for both the Trust and the system partners, which we will use, both in terms of the basis for the next improvement plan, and also, crucially, in terms of winter planning, which is just about beginning. We know, as we do each year, there's a whole programme of work around making sure that the A&E and wider system partners are adequately prepared for the pressures of winter. That work began yesterday, and the outputs of this diagnostic piece that the intensive support team are supporting us with for next week will form a key part of that. So just wanted to make the governing body aware of that work. Building on some of the updates on the long-term plan, there will be, within the long-term plan, a whole host of new indicators that we'll, in the fullness of time, report against. They'll look at a number of the transformation initiatives that are happening, and we'll put, in some cases for the first time, some performance metrics around delivery of those. So the digital agenda, for example, we've had a whole host of work take place over the last couple of years to improve the join-up between various electronic records, and going forward there'll now be some performance metrics which will help track delivery and implementation of those schemes. The IAP position for Merton, as we know, has been problematic. It's been a disappointing start to the contract. predominantly that's been due to the limited resource that's been available. South West London St George's, who provide that service for us, have significantly improved that situation over the last month or so. They've appointed a third party, ICS Digital, who support them with treating patients who've been waiting, and we've also made available some resource from the Wandsworth service to support an ongoing recruitment that the Trust have been undertaking has further improved the position. The validated data in the pack doesn't show the recent improvement, but over the last couple of weeks of August, the position has significantly improved, and we're working with the Trust to ensure that position is sustained, and likewise with GPs, we need to ensure that there is absolutely no confusion around referral routes into the service, and that the service has now adequate capacity to treat those patients that have been referred into it. The final point I wanted to make was around the RTT position at at St George's Acute Trust. There's been a whole piece of work over the summer about the Queen Mary site, which has historically operated off a different PAS system to the main Tooting site. A whole mobilisation transition plan has been in place. That's been subject to some independent third-party review. The CCG is happy with the output of that, as is the Trust, and the transition will happen now in mid-September. Overall, in performance terms, there'll be about a 1% improvement now that final part of the Trust begin reporting their RTT pathways for the first time. The only ongoing concern regarding RTT, the Trust is ahead of its trajectory, both for its long waits, its 52-week waits, there are now very few of those remaining, and also the overall delivery against the 18-week standard is on plan. Our only remaining concern is the overall PTL, the overall waiting list. We know there are some data quality issues, there are some duplicates in that, which is causing some distortion in the numbers. The Trust are well aware of it, they're well aware of what's causing it, and they're now looking at their validation resource to clean that data up. There was a mass clean-up of data ahead of re-reporting back in January, and they're now looking at ensuring they do have enough business as usual support to keep that where it needs to be. But I'll pause there, happy to answer questions, anything I've mentioned, or the report.
John, I thought for Merton context, it's probably just worth mentioning as well that we've talked about the intensive support team doing a review at St George's. They have recently completed a similar piece of work at St Helier, and I know that we're working really closely with our Sutton colleagues around what some of the actions are coming out of that. So just worth being aware that it's I think quite a similar process, so that opportunities for learning between the two trusts will be really helpful.
Before I open it up, I think it's probably worth saying at the Integrated Governance and Quality Committee, we had quite a big discussion about IAPT, and I know the team was subject to some challenge about, are we doing everything we can to try and cover that position? And if I remember rightly, one of the key things is that the workforce, in terms of the therapists, there is just a supply issue across the whole patch. So it's not a Merton-specific issue, but there is an issue with St George's recruiting people at the right pace, simply because of a supply issue. So,
but it is improving.
Yeah, good. So let's start on my left, Tim.
Hi, John. Thanks for that. I just wanted to ask about falls. Merton, I think, if I think back to our quality committees of a few years ago, has always had a very high level of sort of over 65 fall rate. If I think of what sort of primary care have done, we've worked using a Solace tool to identify frailty, and there's been quite a lot of investment in frailty, but it's just, that's gone up again, I think, in this quarter.
Tim, which page are you?
So I think it's page 7 of the performance report, and it's looking at the injuries from falls in people over 65 and over, where we have 2,817 episodes as the latest figure. And it's just that's in red and going up, and it's just the knowing that we've also got some increased work in primary care, looking at our care home patients and trying to invest in multidisciplinary work, working with CLCH. But also knowing on the ground, I'm experiencing quite long waits for domiciliary physio in particular. It's what we think and how we identify the people who are falling, and whether or not we are working on the right cohort of people who are falling. I certainly know when we use the Solace tool, and we looked at a percentage of our, if you like, the most frail people. Often those most frail people are already very frail and in situations where falls are being minimised. And actually it's the subgroup, if you like, the second level of the iceberg, where there's probably quite a lot of sort of undiagnosed frailty or comorbidities that cause falls. Have we got any work going ahead where we can, as clinicians and directors, look at our falls population and what else we potentially could be doing to reduce that, as that has been a perpetual problem for Merton, slightly oddly compared to some of our peers, and I've never truly understood. You know, we do work on it, but it still seems to be a problem.
Yeah, I'll respond and hand over to Josh. I mean, there are some of those indicators that are very long range, and this is one of them. So I think it's not all that sensitive to some of those recent initiatives. We are about to move to our new risk strat tool, which will replace the Solace tool and allow that functionality to come back. But I'll hand over to Josh for a wider response.
And John, what you mean by that is the data is from Q3 17-18?
Yes, yeah. So this data is reported very infrequently. So we need a local measure to help us track some of the initiatives that are in place, because waiting for the national refresh isn't sensitive enough to show us the impact of those. But it is an issue, certainly, but this data is very historic.
But also it'd be lovely to have a question from you both on the CLCH performance around domiciliary physio and the pressures they're under, and actually is that being discussed in quality committees in the
Yes, so it was highlighted at week before last IGQC. So the quality team are going to bring some into the next IGQC. We've got it on the agenda, and it will probably be this is what we're planning on doing, but we'll try and pull together the information that we've got with the care homework and the data that we get from CLCH. So it was highlighted when John presented it at IGQC, so we're looking at something.
That's great. So I didn't know that was going to happen. That's brilliant. We'll play into that as well. The other thing to mention is we now have a joint frailty board with St George's to look at it from their angle as well. Obviously, they're seeing people when they have fallen and come in, so there's a certain amount of regression you can do from that to understand the circumstances. Happy to share details of that. Next week at the clinical oversight group, we've got a session on commissioning intentions. One of the areas of that is around this particular issue, so colleagues will be able to input into, understand what our plans are and input into them at that point next week.
Dagmar, was yours on this?
Yeah, it's also on falls, because obviously, yes, Merton has always been red, and there have been several attempts to dig a bit deeper and really understand. I think there's also something around the more preventative, less frail now, but frail in the future cohort, very good evidence-based sort of balance and physical activity, not very universal. So the HIN has actually some really good models. So I'm very keen that oversight casts its net a bit wider. And voluntary sector age, UK, etc., have some quite good stuff that we could mobilise.
Rohan, is yours on the same thing? Okay, keep going.
I'm surprised. I'm really interested to see what the results are for this year. There was a scheme run by the Fire Brigade, Fire Well and Safe, which was run across 5 schemes in London, of which Merton was the most successful. It's unfortunately been decommissioned, but effectively they were going into people's houses who were elderly and frail and trying making their house sort of foolproof. And that's been over the last 16 months, which unfortunately was the year before this. And because we were the most successful scheme, we could see whether that had an impact. And I hear it did, but let's see.
Claire, you had something separate?
Well, actually, no. My question had been about what Tim had mentioned, because I'd noticed that gradually rising, so it was concerning me. So.
Anything else that people want to ask about? No? So that's for information. We have been through that at IGQC, and those minutes are available. So thank you, John. We'll take that as noted. We've then got on the agenda for noting the summarised minutes from Finance Committee in Common, 2 of those, from the Integrated Governance and Quality Committee and from the Audit Committee in Common. Having looked at those in advance, were there any questions or comments that people had arising from those summarised minutes? These are for noting. No, so we shall note those. And then that brings me to the opportunity to open it up to questions from the public. I haven't had any written questions in advance, so I will open it up.
I was asking, can I ask for the board's opinion of the fact that 20% of one of the hospitals you do send patients to, Epsom Hospital, 20% of the land and buildings have been sold. The buildings that were there were solid brick buildings. 20% has been sold. They only received £18.5 million for that huge bit of valuable land. The Trust have recently announced that they made less than £12 million profit from that sale. And by my reckoning, it's going to cost them much more than that 12 million to re-provide the facilities in the buildings they've sold. And they're re-providing them in temporary porter cabin type structures with a thin skin of brick on the surface to make them look like the brick-built structures. So we've lost 20% of one of our local hospitals' land and building for a net loss financially, as well as a loss of 20% of the potential land for future use in our growing population. I'd like the board's opinion on that and the fact that there are plans to do the same at St Helier Hospital.
So I think it'd be difficult for the Merton board to give a view on land sales at Epsom Hospital, because I wouldn't expect the Merton CCG board to know the detail of that, because Epsom isn't one of the most local hospitals for the board. In terms of what that means for St Helier, again, I don't think the board will be in a position to comment on that. I mean, we note your concern about that. I guess one of the issues, if there are services at Epsom being provided in substandard accommodation at the moment, it does emphasise the need for us to find a sustainable solution for Epsom St Helier and to make sure we can invest in the facilities across both those sites, which, as you know, we're committed to doing. I wouldn't expect the board to particularly be able to comment on Epsom or on the Trust strategy around land sales.
Well, could I just, I mean, I have outlined what's happened. Please check what I've told you. It's in the Trust paperwork. In their last public meeting, they announced that they had made 12.4 profit from that sale, but some of that was from a further sale of land at Sutton Hospital, the ex-Sutton Hospital, and in discussion it was revealed that that was about £1 million. Now, assume for the moment that what I've told you is the truth, and I promise you it is. Can you tell me what you think of the principle of a trust selling 20% of its land and buildings for a net financial loss?
I really don't think that's a question that the board is going to be in a position to answer.
I think the board ought to concentrate on it, because this is happening and our hospitals are being sold off, and our ability to serve the public with health services, which is your job, is being restricted very, very quickly. And if the board don't know about it, I suggest you make it your business to find out about it, because our health service is being decimated under your noses, and it's your job to provide us, the public, with health services. And you cannot do that if the premises we have available at the moment are being flogged off at bargain basement prices.
Thank you for raising that. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. So I will bring the meeting to a close because I haven't been notified of any other business. We've got the date for the next meeting on Wednesday, 6th of November. And we will close part 1 and we will continue with part 2 very shortly. Thank you.